Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of Midlife Matters, the podcast for women who have left the mommy years and are parenting teens and young adults. Each week, I'll be joined by my friends Julie and Mindy to discuss all the topics that keep women in the middle years up at night. Today, we'll be introducing ourselves and discovering that we might not have known as much about each other as we thought. Let's get started. Mindy and Julie, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited that we're recording what I hope will be the first of many, many episodes together. Today, we're going to take some time to introduce ourselves to our listeners, and I know that even though we've all been friends for a long time, I'm bound to learn something new about each of you. As a little background, we've all known each other for many years. Some of us had babies when we met, some preschool and elementary age kids. We've watched the 12 kids that we have between us grow up. We've observed graduations and even some marriages along the way. I think that doing this podcast together will just be one way for us to have fun and explore a new adventure. Mindy, why don't you start us off? Tell the listeners who you are and where you're from.
Well, hey, ladies, I have to say I'm excited to hear from you guys, too. So I have to say, my life, I was born to a military family in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And from there, it took me a long time, actually, to figure out how many places I had lived. In fact, when I was going through the list of all the moves that we had as an Army family and then as a married woman, I got up to 15 places.
Oh, my goodness.
And my son Grant was in the room and he said, "Mom, you're just a nomad." I'm like, I'm not nomadic. Okay. But I'm committed to the people in my life, not to the places I've been.
Right.
So, born in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I had an older brother and was born into, thankfully, a loving Christian home. My parents were actually married. My mother was 16. My dad was 18.
See, there's a new fact that I never knew about you, Mindy.
Yes. My mom was 19 when she had my brother, and she was 21 when she had me. And my parents were and still are an excellent example of a loving marriage, which I know is extremely rare. My brother and I were very close. Actually, the four of us were really close because we had to be. We didn't have typical traditions at holidays because we were always someplace new. For instance, every Christmas, we just kind of knew we would be on the road somewhere. There was one Christmas that we spent 18 hours in the car to drive from Texas to Georgia see my mom's family. So I thought it would be fun to go through the list of places since it really took me a concerted effort to go back through where I have lived. And I will say this, and part of what makes me who I am is that I've only lived in any one place at the most 5 years. I have never lived any place longer. So we started our journey in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. We went to Hawaii.
Then there's another fact. How you lived in Hawaii?
Yes. And I did kindergarten, first and second grade in Hawaii.
Wow.
Then we moved to Fort Benning, Georgia, which is Columbus, and that's where my mother's family is and still is. We went from Georgia to San Antonio, Texas.
Wow.
From Texas, we went to Clarksville, Tennessee, and then we moved to Hinesville, Georgia, which was Fort Stewart. It's actually about 40 minutes from Savannah, Georgia. Okay. Then from there, the summer before my senior year of high school, we moved to Waynesville, Missouri, where I graduated, met my husband in youth group there. Actually met him the very first night we tried a church. We went to a youth group and I met Bryce.
Wow.
I was immediately kind of attracted to him because I could tell he was a leader in the youth group.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't date or anything right away. So after I graduated, I went to Southwest Baptist University in Bolivar, Missouri. And Bryce and I began dating, actually, though, my senior year of high school. So I went to Southwest Baptist University for 6 months, for one semester.
Mm-hmm.
Bryce asked me to marry him. I said yes. And I moved back home to plan the wedding my second semester of freshman year of college.
Oh, wow. And you have a daughter that's, in her freshman year of college, and you probably think now, what if she came and told me she was going to do that?
Yeah.
But it worked out.
And that's something that I will say is that I started school a year younger. And so when I graduated from high school, I was a year younger
Okay.
than most students. I was 18 when Bryce and I were married. I had been out of high school for 1 year, though.
Okay.
Like that makes a really big difference.
Right. Yeah. It's a little difference.
But I come from a family from my parents who were married young and who had stayed married, and I loved their relationship.
Right.
So, in a sense, with all of the, all that we had been through, I knew very much what I wanted in life. And if you had asked me as a senior in high school, what are your goals? I would have said to be a wife and a mother.
Mm-hmm.
There was no career aspirations. There was nothing else that really I was passionate about.
Right.
And so getting married at that age, though it was the absolute best thing for me, I would not recommend for anyone else. But I mean, that's how the Lord works in our
Right.
lives, is he just gives opportunities to some people. And I'll say Bryce and I were kids when we were married. Absolute kids. And so we were in college. He was at Mizzou, University of Missouri, and Columbia, Missouri. When we were married, that's where we lived. And when he graduated from college, we were actually going to go into full-time ministry through a family friend, received a full-ride scholarship to Columbia International University in Columbia, South Carolina.
Okay. That's great.
So, yes, we moved there and found out 3 months later that we were pregnant with Abby.
Exciting.
And so we didn't really have to, we decided we wanted to start a family, but we were already pregnant and didn't know it. And at the same time, found out that Bryce could not work full time and attend seminary full time, which we didn't realize. So we stayed in Columbia, South Carolina all of 6 months before we packed up and moved back home to Waynesville, Missouri to figure out how to get a job. And we both wanted me to be able to stay home. And so Bryce, the first day we moved back to Waynesville, Missouri, we knew the owner of a local Ford dealership, and he had his bachelor's in business, didn't really know which direction with that he wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
So just to pay the bills and, to be able for me to stay at home now that I was pregnant, he went to Seller Sexton Ford dealership there in Waynesville, Missouri, and came home gainfully employed as the shuttle van driver.
Oh, my goodness. I did not know that about Bryce. He's come a long way.
Yes, he was the shuttle van driver at that dealership for probably a month, and then they promoted him to a salesman, and then they promoted him to over their marketing and advertising and things like that, and internet sales. And we were there for 4 years. We were blessed to have Abby there and Grant there. We were in the same town as my parents and his mom and sister. At that point, though, the Lord was just laying on our hearts that there has to be more to life. Mm-hmm. He hated working at the dealership. Okay. He loved his boss. He hated the dealership. He said, I sit at the window and I watch life pass me by. And from that point, we started praying about what the Lord would have in career direction for him. We sought a lot of advice, and it turned into hospital administration. Mm. So at that point, he went back to grad school at Mizzou, and we moved there. But we hardly saw him for 2 years. And then his first job out of there was in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay.
So we ended up in Atlanta, where we had 2 more children. Mm-hmm. After being in Atlanta, then we moved to Nashville, Tennessee, where I met you lovely ladies.
Yes, that's where we know you from.
And we were in Nashville, absolutely loved it. We were there for 5 years and then moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, where we hated it at first, but then grew to absolutely love it. And just 2 months ago, the Lord made it very clear that we were supposed to move to Pennsylvania.
Which is a whole different ballgame for you.
Of all the moving, if you have listened to the places I've been, I've never been farther north than Missouri. Uh-huh. So this southern girl is freezing.
Yes. Yes, we were just talking about that yesterday. Mindy was saying she just can't figure out what to wear to stay warm.
So it's already cold?
This is Tennessee winter already, and it's the beginning of fall.
Yeah. Layers are your friend.
Yes, yes. Currently, I have the 4 children. Bryce and I have been married almost 22 years. And I'm
Amazing.
thankful to say he's my best friend. We've had to grow very close together with our moves. Abby Ray is now a freshman in college at University of Tennessee in Chattanooga. And Grant is a junior. Jacob is a 7th grader. And Nathaniel is a 5th grader.
So you have 4 different schools.
Yes.
And that
And now
keeps you busy.
yes. I used to
Definitely.
think different schools were difficult, but now we're in different states, and that's a whole nother thing.
Right. Yes. And we look forward to sharing with listeners on another podcast just your kids going to college. And then Mindy has the twist of her oldest going to college for the first time, and then a week or so later moving all these states away. Thank you, Mindy. I think that I learned a lot about you that I hadn't known before. So it's like,
I certainly did too.
I know. And you can talk to people, but you hardly ever delve way down deep into where someone was really from and all the places that they've moved and early jobs. Like, I just assumed that Bryce had gone to school for hospital administration right from the beginning. I never knew he had worked at a car dealership or, you just don't know those things because when you meet people, they already have the career that they have.
Right.
So that's really interesting.
Yes.
All right, Julie, we want to hear from you. And I know Julie's a little bit nervous about this, but that's why Mindy went first, because she has that gift of gab because you developed that over moving so many times. So now Julie's going to take it away.
Okay, when you hear my story, you'll know why I'm like I am. Mine is a stark contrast to Mindy's. I've been a Tennessean my entire life. I was born in Memphis and lived there until about 20 years ago, and then we've lived in Nashville ever since. So I've only lived in 2 places. It was in Memphis, in a little church that had about 24,000 members that I
Oh,
met
wow.
my husband, John. He was in medical school at the time, and I was in the process of applying to medical school. And after we started dating seriously and talking about marriage, I decided to kind of let go of that dream of going to medical school, just because I saw what his life was like, how little time he had, his long hours, and I knew if I was going to be a wife and his wife, I didn't want that kind of lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
too. And so I applied to pharmacy school, and we got married the week after he graduated from medical school, and then I had finished my first year of pharmacy school.
Okay.
So I moved into our first apartment straight from my parents' home.
Uh-huh.
So not only have I only lived in 2 cities, I've only lived with my parents, with John.
Mm-hmm.
Don't recommend that. I loved my parents. They're great. I loved living at home, but a lot of the issues that would normally get worked out with a roommate, I had to work out with John as a
Okay.
newlywed.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, and not to mention, I am an only child, so I didn't have to share anything. I didn't have to
Oh.
wait on anything.
So marriage was the first time I never thought about that really being the first time that you had to accommodate someone else, really.
Right. Yeah,
I'm
as an
sure
only
John
child.
And I just feel like if I had never shared a bathroom with siblings and I immediately had to start sharing a bathroom with my husband,
with a boy.
I know, I just would be like, really? Of course, I guess your dad, I mean, you had your dad, but,
Yeah, we did, and we lived in a small house. We only had one bathroom,
Okay,
so
so
we did
you
share.
had shared.
Yeah,
Okay. But
we
if you
did
had
share.
always had your own, okay, so you knew about sharing bathrooms.
Yeah. And ironically, John is much neater than I am. So,
Okay.
but those first few years of marriage, even though he was a resident for those first 4 years and I was still in pharmacy school, I just remember them as really, really fun. Like, looking back, we really didn't have any real responsibility. School is not real responsibility.
Right.
So we just had a lot of good times. And just to say a little bit about John, I know this is mostly supposed to be about me, but I'll just say that I feel like I am the best Julie King when I am with him, just because he helps me to think positively and to be hopeful, and he's always encouraging me to kind of make the best of my situation. So I really, really appreciate that about him.
And that is one of John's gifts. He's an extremely positive person.
Yeah. So now, 3 kids later, and not to mention many pets that have come and gone, we have been married for 30 years. The last 20 have been here in Nashville. We've recently had 2 weddings in the past 3 years. Our daughter Molly, who is 26, married Colin, and they live in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And our son Andrew, who's 24, he married Kayla, and they live here in Nashville.
Okay.
And our youngest David is 20, and he's in his second year of college, and he still lives here at home.
Right.
So I'm not quite an empty nester yet. Plus, we have Charlie, our 5-year-old chocolate lab, who absolutely adores me, which
He
I'm thankful
does.
for.
He does.
And Frida, our kitty, who kind of snubs us all. So
Yeah.
we've homeschooled for the past 15 years, so my days really look a lot different now. My days went from kind of full and hectic. You remember those, Mindy? Homeschooling days to kind of empty and quiet. And I'm starting to kind of fill them up again with a lot of things, but I realized that I'd like to focus on a few things and learn to really do them well. I kind of feel like I'm a jack of all trades and master of none.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to focus on some things that I've put off for the last 20 years. I think it's after you've been raising your kids and focusing on caring for other people, you don't even know what you want to do or what you should do. You've kind of forgotten
Right.
what you loved and what your favorites are. But I knew it's time to start thinking about like who I want to be over the next 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
Because I could easily, hopefully, live another 25 years. And that's a longer amount of time than I spent raising my kids. And when you think about
Right.
it that way, it just makes you really not want to waste those years.
Oh, sure. I mean, I
Uh,
just saw an obituary the other night. The guy was 98, so you could live 40 more years or longer.
You guys are already doing too much math for me.
Well, recently, Marie and I were in this workshop called Birds of a Feather for kind of people preparing for empty nest. And she had us kind of trying to think about who we are and what some of our favorites were to kind of get in touch with who we are because we may have forgotten. So, thinking that the past might be a clue to the future, I did this little exercise
Mm-hmm.
where I went back and kind of divided my life up into little chunks, phases of life. And I tried to think of one outstanding memory from every phase and to see, like, well, what was it that really brought me happiness? What was really fun from those stages of life? And then either see if I need to incorporate those still or maybe that I was. And what I found out was that it was interesting to see how my life had kind of come full circle. I really am still doing a lot of those things. So I was just going to kind of go through that to kind of help you
Sure.
know me a little better. So early childhood, my outstanding memory is that I loved to be outside. I never wanted to come inside. I had a tree house. I had picnics in the tree house. I played every sport you could imagine. And the worst punishment for me would be to have to stay inside.
Okay.
So, and today I still would rather be outside. I live on my screened-in porch. I do all the yard work at our house, and I like to hike and just to be active. So that's something that's kind of carried through from that from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
In middle school years, one thing that really stood out was my dad entrusted me with his Minolta manual camera. And I took pictures of everything.
Oh, wow.
And I even got books to learn. We didn't have the internet, so I had to get books to learn like what f-stop meant and aperture and film speed. And so I would ride my bike to parks, practice photography, and I took a lot of pictures of my dog. Still have some of those.
Oh, that's cool.
And that just kind of developed a love for photography. And now I take thousands of pictures when I go on vacation. I love to take travel pictures. Okay, moving on to high school. Probably the best thing I did was I got to travel to Europe with my French class.
Oh, that's
And
exciting.
something I never thought my parents would let me do, but they did. And I knew right then that if there was any way I could ever get back there, I would. And thankfully, that's something I've been able to do a couple times with John. And this summer, we even got to take all our kids. So I love to travel to new places. And I think that first trip to Europe really started that. In college, my outstanding memory was definitely our college group. We were a part of an incredible college ministry. Our church was several hundred college kids. And that's where I met my husband. So that makes it a special place and time. It was just a really one of our favorite times to be in church.
Mm-hmm.
And what made it great was the fellowship that we had and the great leaders we had who opened their homes to us and shared their homes with us and had Bible studies and parties for us. And
And that's such a formative time. You don't forget those.
yeah, yeah, you don't. So now I've taught in our youth group for the past 10 years at our church. We've just started hosting college kids at our house every Monday night. And that's been really fun to, like you said, to see these kids and all
Sure.
the directions that they're going and how they're growing. And just thinking back to how important and special that was in our life.
And to be
Um,
invited into a home when you're in college is just so much nicer than eating out
right.
or in the cafeteria or just wherever, having to cook your own. I mean, a home cooked meal is everything.
Right. And that's what the kids that have come on Monday nights have said is, oh, it's a home cooked meal. And I said, well, it's just Stouffer's lasagna reheated. And she said, hey, I'm in a home and you're a real mom.
That's so
so,
sweet.
so that counts.
Yeah.
And then as a young married, I guess my best memories included the friendships that we made with other young couples. Like I mentioned before, our apartment was the first place that I called my own.
Mm-hmm.
So I loved decorating it and making it uniquely ours. And then hospitality really became both important to both of us. And we just loved having friends over, and I think everyone really loved being at our house too. And I remember on one occasion we invited some new friends over for lunch, and they actually stayed for dinner.
Oh, wow.
And we're still friends with that couple, and those are some of our closest friendships that were made during that time. Even
Sure.
though we all live in different states, we still
Mm-hmm.
get together. And then that's carried on through today. I still love hosting parties, game nights, bonfires, cookouts at our house. And the last phase, kind of before kids, was my pharmacy school days. And what I think I most fondly remember from those days is a friend I met on the first day of school. We became really good friends, and she was such an inspiration to me. And I just remember being in awe of her because I had never met anyone like her before. She sewed everything. She had these large weaving looms in her house that she wove these beautiful blankets
Oh,
and these
wow.
scarves. And, and she was only in her 20s and she knew how to do all this stuff. And I say she was kind of the original pioneer woman.
Right.
Uh, so over the years, I asked her to teach me all of her skills. So I started to smock, and I smocked all our kids' clothes. I sewed for myself. I sewed for our home. I even went through a basket weaving phase,
That's,
which my
yeah.
friends tease me about.
Well, you are awesome at crafts, so I can believe that.
Yeah.
So people that only know me here in Nashville maybe haven't seen that side of me, but I still do love to be creative. 30 years later, now I even have my own loom. I've only made one thing, but I do have that loom.
Right. You're realizing your dream.
Yeah, I'm dabbling in watercolor painting, royal icing cookies. I just really like to be creative.
Mm-hmm.
So, since these things have made me happy most of my life, I know, hey, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. I want to continue doing these things, incorporating things like hospitality, serving,
Mm-hmm.
creativity, staying active, and learning new things.
Well, I learned a lot
So,
about you, especially those early years. That's really interesting. All right. Unlike Mindy and Julie, I was not raised in the South. And I'm sure that when you are listening to all three of our voices, you're like, let's see, two of these belong, and one sounds very different. And that is because I was born in Buffalo, New York, home of the snow. And I grew up in a small town about 3,000 to 4,000 people called Cuba. And it was about an hour and a half from Buffalo. So it was really rural. If you think of a country song with like trucks and two stoplights and real small town schools, that is my life. I did go to a small school. I graduated in a class with just 62 students, and I was with most of the same kids, kindergarten through graduation. I went to college to become a speech therapist because I really wanted to work with the deaf, and I thought, this would be the best way to do it. I didn't realize at the time that that's just a small part of speech pathology. So I went to Fredonia, which was a State University of New York school, a SUNY school. It was about 2 hours from Cuba. And that's where I met Steve, my husband. He also grew up in Western New York in a town called Corning. Did either of your moms ever have Corelle dishes?
Oh, yeah. Corningware?
Yes, that is the home of Corningware. It's Corning Glassworks, and they have made a variety of things over the years, but I think anyone in our era that grew up with Corellware or Corning dishes
Yeah.
would be able to recognize that. I was also somebody that got married pretty young. I got married between the 2 semesters of my senior year. Steve was a year older, and I was getting ready to student teach. He had already gotten a job, and instead of getting my own apartment in the town where I was going to be student teaching, we decided we would get married in December.
How old were you?
I was 21. So we were pretty young. When I look back at our wedding pictures now, a lot of people say, you guys were just like babies. And so we moved to a little town. Well, it was a little bit bigger, obviously, than the one I grew up in, probably several times bigger. But it was called Jamestown, New York, which is near Erie, Pennsylvania. This was where Steve had his first job, and I traveled back and forth to finish my master's degree. After I graduated from graduate school, I did get a job at the Maryland School for the Deaf, and we moved to Maryland briefly. Probably, I think it was maybe about 2 years. During that time, we had our oldest daughter, and I didn't want to work after she was born. Even though I'd had this dream to work with the deaf, it was not as important to me as staying home with her. I just didn't want to leave her every day. So after I'd been home with her about a year, we decided to move back to Jamestown to be closer to family. I wasn't willing to move all the way back to my really super small hometown, but I was willing to move back like within an hour of that. So we were about an hour from my parents, about 3 hours from Steve's parents. And I could have lived like that the rest of my life. I mean, I was happy doing that. It was a really sweet time. We lived there for 5 years. We had our second child. We just have really great memories of that time. We had good friends, a great church. But all of my younger siblings, I'm the oldest of 4, during that time were going to Tennessee colleges, and they all met and married people in Tennessee, which ended up rocking my world. Because,
all 3 of them?
Yeah, they all.
How did they choose Tennessee?
Yeah.
I am not sure. The sibling after me is my brother Mark, and he's 18 months younger than me, and I do not know. It's weird, but at that time, I don't know if you talk to your siblings as much as you do now, and I don't remember what brought him to Tennessee. But he ended up going to Union, and then my other brother went to Union, and my sister graduated from MTSU. So all 3 of them were younger than me. They all met and married their spouses here, and my parents said, hey, 3 out of 4 of our kids live in Tennessee. We're moving. And I was like, what? I moved back to be near you, and now you're leaving. And we really had a big decision to make. It was like one of those pivotal moments in your life where you have to decide what you're going to do. Steve worked for the federal government, so he could really work in any state that he wanted because you could transfer to other offices. He worked for Social Security, so they have Social Security offices in every state. And Steve's parents were about 3 hours from us, so it wasn't close enough where you could say, hey, come to so-and-so's recital, or, you want to drop by for lunch, or can you watch them while we go out on Friday night? It wasn't close enough that we saw them often enough that I felt like that was meeting the need that I had. I wanted my kids to know cousins, aunts, uncles. So we decided to move to Tennessee. We just said, God, if you want us to move to Tennessee, then you're going to have to work it out, but we're willing. And there was a Social Security office in Nashville that, wanted Steve to come. And my mom always said, Marie's not going to move unless they pull the moving truck up outside her door and pack her up. And that is exactly what they did. So they moved us to Tennessee, which was even better. And that was a real shocker for me. And I was pregnant at the time with our third child. He was born a few months after we moved here. So there was just a lot of changes that year. Okay, so we moved to Tennessee. We did get involved in a church. That's where I met Julie. If anyone knows church shopping, they know that it's torturous. And we'd already visited so many churches, and I had a new baby at home. I was like, why don't we try the one where Davis goes to preschool, but I'm not actually going. You go check out, see if it's even worth going the next week because I'm tired of going around to different churches. And so I think Steve took the 2 older kids and I stayed home with Isaac. And John, I think he just noticed Steve sitting by himself and like went over and sat next to him the first day. And I don't know, it just struck Steve as so friendly. And then he was like, we've got to go back there the next week. And we've been at Judson ever since. But I
remember first talking to you in the hall by the library.
Okay.
And Isaac was in his little stroller and we struck up a conversation. That's my first memory.
Uh-huh. Oh, wow. Yeah. I think it may have even been on a Wednesday night. I don't know.
I think so.
Anyways, it was a transitional time. We were happy to be near family, but it was hard to get used to a new area. Then 20 months later, we actually had twins. So people think that is insane. And I really think it's insane looking back on it now. But we had, at the time the twins were born, we had an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 20-month-old, and 2 newborns. And I always tell people, they were born in May, that was the worst summer of my life. And I have never liked summer since. You can ask my kids. I hate summer vacation with a passion. There's too much free time. There's not enough routine. And I've never liked summer vacation. I am an anomaly in that. When people are on Facebook saying, oh, I wish my kids weren't going back to school, that is not me. I'm like, what day does school start? And it is on the calendar. So, all right. So moving along, we were really, really super busy for a long time. A long period of time raising the 5 kids. While the twins were toddlers and in preschool, my husband decided that he would like to go back to law school at night. So he would work all day, go to school at night for 4 years.
That's very smart of Steve.
I know. And I worked part-time at the hospital. My mom would watch the kids one day, and then my mother-in-law would watch the kids the other day. Side note, my in-laws did end up moving down here after the twins were born. So they ended up in Tennessee too, which is really cool. So those were really busy years, good years, but so busy that they stick out in my mind as like the real trench work of parenting. Mm-hmm. Then in about 2008, Steve got a job in the private sector, which required quite a bit of travel. And he's gone, 2 to 3 nights, sometimes 4 nights a week. And so I said, I'm not going to work anymore because I feel like there needs to be one parent who's able to be on call all the time. And with him gone so much, that has been me. And I've always enjoyed being home. I mean, I never didn't want to be a stay-at-home mom. So it was kind of like, now I get to stop working guilt-free because Steve travels. I get to be home. If you fast forward about 10 years, our oldest just got married in December. They were also young to get married. My daughter was 21 and my son-in-law was 22. And they were in the same point in life that Steve and I were, the senior year of college. But they got married in December, graduated in May, and they're doing great. Our second oldest is a senior in college, and he's going to graduate with his accounting degree in May. Then we have 3 in high school. One's a sophomore, and 2 are freshmen. So we're kind of moving out of that constantly being busy stage. We actually have weekends and Saturdays that come around without, like, sports agenda or activities that we need to do, which is amazing. But I'm also starting to look ahead to a few years from now when everyone's going to be in college. And I think, well, what am I going to be doing? And I'm like Julie, I'm thinking, well, what did I used to like to do? And what would I want to do next? Because I really don't see myself going back to speech therapy. It's not a passion. And I talk to other people, a lot of times you go to school for something when you're young. You think you'll be passionate about it forever. But fast forward 20 or 25 years and it may not hold as much interest for you. So I need to figure out what that next thing is. And in the meantime, I'm going to enjoy doing the things that are in my life that are creative because I love creativity, and this podcast is one of them. Friends, we're so glad you joined us today. We'd love to hear your questions about today's episode or any suggestions you have for future topics. You can find us at Midlife Matters Podcast on both Facebook and Instagram. You can also contact us at midlifematterspodcast.com. We hope you'll join us next week for part 2 of Getting to Know Your Hosts, We'll be answering 6 questions that promise to reveal at least a few deep, dark secrets. See you then.